Timeless and spaceless, in the mental sphere, you operate with time. In the astral sphere, you work with space, shape, color. In the material world, you work with time and space simultaneously. I am going to explain the functions of biomagnetism in the light of some examples. With the help of your vital force, charge a room with the desire that you feel well in it. Enthrall this force with the desire that, as long as you live in the room, the influence should persist. Continue renewing, and keep doing so, even when you leave the room and are absent for some time. Should anyone else enter your room ignoring that there is an accumulation of vital force, he will feel very uncomfortable in your dwelling. Now and again, you can reinforce the density and power of your radiant energy in your room by repeating the desire. If you live in a room influenced in such a favorable way, the stored vital force will always exert a good influence on your health, and consequently on your body. The vital force in this room has the desired vibration of the health. If, however, you intend to do occult exercises in this room, which have nothing to do with health, following another thought vibration, you will not book the same good results as in an unloaded room or in a room that you have charged with a desire responsive to your idea. Therefore, it is always advisable to load the room with the thought vibrations corresponding to your respective work and experiments. So for instance, you might charge a ring, a stone or any other object with a wish that the person wearing it should be favored by fortune and success. Now there are two possibilities of fixing and timing. The first method consists in fixing the vital virtue on the stone or the metal with your imagination and your concentrated wish, timing it so that the force shall remain forever in it, drawing even further from the universe to bring fortune and success to the person concerned as soon as she will wear the object. You may, of course, load the object you choose for a short time only if you like, so that the influence is broken off as soon as the purpose aimed at is attained. The second possibility is called universal loading, which is operated in the same way, including, however, the concentrated wish that as long a time as the object, ring, stone, jewelry, exists, the bearer of it should be benefited by fortune, success, etc. Such universal loadings performed by an adept will keep their virtues and their effects for centuries. As we have learned from the history of the Egyptian mummies, such fixed forces continue acting for thousands of years. If a talisman or an object destined and individually loaded for a definite person falls into the hands of someone else, he will not experience the least influence. But if this object returns to the true owner, this influence will go on acting. Now let me describe another field where vital force is active, namely that of healing. Magnetism. If a magician treats a sick person, no matter whether personally by magnetic strokes or by putting on hands, or at a distance, that is, by imagination and willpower, he must the law of time exactly if he wants to be successful. The routine manner of magnetizing is as follows. The magnetizer, with the aid of imagination, makes his vital force flow out of his body, mostly from his hands, into the sick person. This method supposes the magnetizer to be positively sound and to have a surplus of vital force, or else he will bring danger into his own health. I am sorry to say that I have seen bad cases where the magnetizer, by excessive transfers of his own vital force, suffered such heavy damage to his health that he faced a complete nervous breakdown, apart from other side effects such as diseases of the heart, and so on. Such consequences are unavoidable if the magnetizer spends more force than he is able to restore, especially if he is treating several patients at once. This method presents another disadvantage, namely that the magnetizer uses his own force to transfer his own psychic vibrations and character traits onto the patient, influencing him indirectly in a psychic way too. Therefore, every magnetizer is supposed and required to be of a noble character. Yet if a magnetizer has a patient whose character properties are worse than his own, he will indirectly draw the evil influences of the patient on himself, which is disadvantageous for the magnetizer in any event. The magnetizer who, however, has been trained in occultism does not give the patient all of the vital force of his own body, but draws it from the universe and makes it stream into the patient's body directly through his hands, together with the concentrated desire of health. With both methods, magnetizing has to be repeated often if one wants a quicker success, for disharmony or diseases suck in and consume the transferred force very rapidly and are greedy for a further supply of force, so that the treatment has to be repeated soon to prevent the state from getting worse. It is otherwise with the magician. The patient feels relieved only when the magician has been psychically opened, that is, if he has accomplished a dynamic accumulation of vital force in his own body and emits light rays of vital force. The magician can employ many methods successfully, but he must always maintain the imagination combined with the desire. Concentration, wishing that the patient gets better and better, hour by hour, from day to day. Some methods will follow, the use of which will help a magician in the treatment of diseases. Above all, he must be well versed in the diagnosis of diseases and their symptoms. He will gain this knowledge through a careful study of the respective literature. Anatomical knowledge is absolutely indispensable. He will not be so careless as to treat diseases necessitating a rapid surgical intervention, or infectious diseases, but in such cases he will be able to accelerate the healing process and contribute to soothing the pains. Besides the medical treatment, he can manage doing so even at a distance. It would be very serviceable if physicians specialized in this field and, besides the allopathic art, learn to employ the magic practice. Therefore the magician should only treat such sick persons as are recommended for this kind of treatment directly by a physician, or work together with a physician to avoid being regarded as a quack or a charlatan. He should follow his calling from pure love of his neighbors and not for the purpose of earning money or as a means of enriching himself. Do not climb upwards on the credulities of mankind. Hold on to the ideal of goodness, and blessing will not fail. Ideally colored magicians will help sick persons without them knowing anything. This kind of help is the most blissful. Let me add some of the most conventional methods a magician can make use of without endangering his health and nervous system. Before approaching a sick person's bed, do at least 7 breaths through the lungs and pores. Accumulate an enormous amount of vital force, drawing it from the universe into your body. And let this vital force shine like brightest light of the sun. By repeated inhaling of the vital force, try to produce a radiant energy of at least 10 yards around your body, which corresponds to a vital force of 10 normal persons. You ought to feel as if your accumulated vital force were lighting up like a sun. If you approach a patient with such a radiance, he will instantly feel a relief, a sensation of ease, and if not afflicted by too painful an illness, he will feel an immediate alleviation. You transfer the accumulated radiant energy quite individually to the patient, and it is up to you to act as you like. A skilled magician needs no magic strokes nor laying on of hands, all that being only auxiliary manipulations, supports for the utterance of his will. He may keep his eyes open or closed during this operation. If he wants, he may look straight at the patient, but he need not do it directly. Here it is exclusively the imagination that is working. But during the whole act of power transference, the magician may also sit with the patient without contacting him personally. Imagine that the radiant energy surrounding you will stream forth into the patient's body and be pressed into it, penetrating and illuminating all the pores of the sick person. Let your willpower order the compressed radiant energy to bring about the recovery of the patient. All the time you have to be absolutely convinced that the patient is feeling better from one hour to the next, that he does look better every day, and you must also order the radiant energy not to escape from the body before the patient has fully recovered. Loading the body of a patient quantitatively with the radiant energy, which in a sound person means a range of 1 yard, you will be able to bring about recovery in a surprisingly short time in proportion to the kind of illness. Repeat the loading after a while, reinforce the tension of the concentrated radiant energy, and you will be very surprised indeed at noticing the wonderful success you have accomplished. First of all, the radiant energy cannot escape because you fixed it, ordering it to renew itself constantly. Secondly, you fix the time so that the body should feel better from hour to hour, from day to day. And thirdly, you have proportioned the power to the space corresponding to the circumference of the body. At this point, it should be recommended to fix the power of radiation at about 1 yard outside the body, which is equal to the radiation of a normal human being. With this method you have now fulfilled the main condition of the material law of time and space. While using this method, the magician will notice that his radiant energy which he transferred to the patient does not diminish, but keeps on lighting up in the same intensive manner as before. This is to impute to the fact that the vital power accumulated in the body renews itself automatically, similar to communicating pipes, instantly replacing the radiated power. Therefore it is obvious that a magician is able to treat hundreds of patients without ruining his mental strength or his nerves. A different method has to be used if the magician is pressing the vital power directly into the patient's body or into the sick part of the body, only by way of the pores together with the imagination of renewing itself constantly from the universe, till the moment of complete recovery is reached. Here the imagined desire of complete recovery is limited to time and space as well. But this method is only practiced with patients whose nervous system is not yet wholly exhausted, and can consequently bear a certain pressure of the accumulated vital power. With a well-trained magician, of course, the accumulated vital power is, as it were, materialized already, meaning that it is condensed material power that can be compared to electricity. This method, in comparison with the others, is the most popular because it is very simple and exceedingly effective. A very peculiar method is to let the patient inhale one's own radiant power emanation with the help of the imagination. Presuming the patient to be able to concentrate, he can do so himself. Otherwise, the magician has to perform the imagination instead of the patient. In practice, the occurrence is as follows. Your radiant energy is emitting up to a range of 10 yards. As you are near the patient, he is actually swimming in the light of your radiation, which has been impregnated with the desire of recovery. The patient on whom this power has been concentrated will be firmly convinced that he is inhaling your radiant energy with every breath, and will get well. He must imagine intensely that he will go on feeling better and better, even when the magician will no longer be near him. Presuming the patient to be unable to concentrate, or, in the case of sick children, you imagine yourself that with every inhalation the patient accepts your own radiation of vital power, conveys it to the blood, and will bring about a complete recovery. Here also you will have to concentrate on the wish that the force inhaled by the patient should keep on working positively in him. This has been an example of vital force transference from the magicians to another's body by breathing. We can rely on the word of the Bible. When our Lord Jesus Christ was touched by a sick woman in the hope of recovery, our Lord felt the diminution of his vital power, and he remarked to his disciples, "I have been touched." Working with vital power and magnetism, one has to consider time and space. With a view to this fact, I have quoted several examples concerning the treatment of diseases, and I could still mention quite a number of methods for treating sick people from the magnetic standpoint. For example, the magician is able to take up a connection with the mind of a sleeping patient and to realize various methods of treatment in the patient's body. Apart from treating the sick with vital power, he can also cure them magically with the help of the elements, magnetism, and electricity. The detailed description of all the methods and possibilities of treatments would certainly fill a very voluminous book. In this work I am only going to point out single procedures of treatment with regard to time and space, that is, magnetism. High adepts and saints who have trained their imagination to such perfection that all their imageries are realized immediately in all planes do not need methods anymore. Such people have only to express any kind of desire and it will be realized at the very same moment. Step 4. Before describing the difficult exercises of the following step, I wish to point out again that the scholar is not allowed to hurry in his development. He ought to take sufficient time for this purpose if he wants to achieve a real success on the road to magic. He must be absolutely firm in all the exercises of the previous steps before turning to the following ones. Magic mental training. 4. I shall describe here how to transplant your consciousness outwards. We must understand how to transplant our consciousness optionally into every object, animal and human being. Similar to the concentration on objects, put some objects which you are using every day in front of you. Sitting in your habitual position, fix your eyes for a short while on one of the objects, and inculcate the shape, color and size of it firmly in your mind. Now imagine yourself being transmuted into this object. In a way you must feel as the object itself and adopt all its properties. You have to be quite certain of the fact that you are fastened to the spot you have been put, unable to abandon it except through an outside influence. You should even be capable by intense concentration to regard your surroundings from the point of this object, and to grasp its relationship to other objects. For example, supposing the object happens to be on the table, you feel the relationship to this table as well as to all the other things on the table, including the room in which the objects happen to be. Having managed this exercise with one object, you can gradually turn to the other things. The exercise is fulfilled if you have managed to connect each object you selected to your consciousness so that you have adopted the shape, size, and quality of the object, and that you remain in it for at least 5 minutes without any interruption. It must be possible for you to overlook and forget your body completely. Having managed this task, you can choose bigger objects like flowers, plants, shrubs, trees, etc. for your concentrative transmutation of consciousness. Consciousness knows neither time nor space. It is consequently in a causa principle. Nobody should be deterred by the unusual kind of the exercises and by eventual failures at the beginning. Patience, perseverance and tenacity will soon lead to the success aimed at. The Scholar will learn later what significance these preliminary exercises have for the further magical work. As soon as one is able to manage transplanting consciousness into inanimate objects, the exercises with living objects will follow. It has been said before that consciousness is timeless and spaceless, and it is not necessary, while doing the exercises with living creatures, to have the object concerned directly before our eyes. By now the scholar should be trained too far as to be able to imagine any creature he likes to. Let him therefore transplant his consciousness in the imagination of a cat, a dog, a horse, a cow, a goat, etc. The kind of experimental object does not matter. It might as well be an ant, a bird, or an elephant. At first one begins with the imagination of the animal in the motionless condition. Later on walking, running, creeping, flying or swimming, corresponding to the kind of object in question. The scholar must be able to transmute his consciousness in any form he likes to, without interruption if he wishes to regard this as being mastered. Adepts who have been practicing this exercise for years are able to understand any animal and handle it by their will power. In connection with this fact, all we need is to remember the legend of werewolves and other tales by which wizards transmuted themselves into animals. But fairy tales and legends have a far deeper significance to the magician. There is no doubt that these are cases of the so-called black magicians, to adopt all sorts of animal shapes in the invisible world, not to be recognized while doing their wicked work. The good magician will always condemn such actions, and his spiritual faculties allow him to see through such creatures and to recognize the real figure of the artificer. Our preliminary exercises do not serve to induce the scholar to wicked deeds, but to prepare him for the higher magic, where he will have to adopt higher divine forms into which he will transplant his self-consciousness, if one has been trained during the exercise to the point of being capable of adapting any kind of animal shape with the consciousness, and if one can manage to maintain this imagination for 5 minutes without interruption, then the same exercise has to be practiced on human beings. For the beginning, select acquaintances, friends, members of the family, whose imagination you are able to keep in mind, without discrimination of sex and age. One always has to be very sure about how to transplant the consciousness into the body so that one feels and thinks oneself as being the imaginary person. From well-known people one may turn to strangers never seen before, and therefore to be imagined. Finally, you may choose people of different races as experimental subjects. The exercise is ended if you manage to transplant your consciousness for at least 5 minutes into one of the imaginary bodies. The longer the spell of this achievement, the more profitable it will become. This particular exercise gives the magician the power to connect himself with every human being, not only to know the ideas and feelings developing in the imaginary person, his past and his present, his way of thinking and acting, but even to influence him according to his own liking, but still with the proverb in mind, what a man sows, he shall reap. So the magician will never use his influence for anything bad or force people to act against their own will. He will use the great power over every human being given him through these exercises for the good only, and the blessing will never fail. The magician will learn from these facts why the Oriental scholar bestows the highest worship to his master. By worshipping the master, he connects himself instinctively with the master's consciousness, and so being influenced indirectly, his progress will be far more certain and faster as well. It is quite obvious that the Oriental training methods regard the master, guru, as absolutely necessary for the development of the scholar. The well-known Tibetan Inkler is based on the same fundament, but in the inverted order. The master connects himself with the scholar's consciousness and transplants power and enlightenment to him. The same thing happens in the case of the mystics, the point in question being the pneuma transfer. Magic psychic training. 4. In this chapter we shall amplify the work concerning the elements. We have learned to take in the element by breathing through the lungs and pores, and to perceive its specific qualities in our whole body. Now we shall charge single parts of the body with any element we like, which can be executed in 2 different ways. The magician should manage both methods. The first one is as follows. In the same way as described in step 3, through inhaling with lungs and pores, you are breathing the element into the whole body and accumulating it there. That means you are breathing out thoroughly without any imagination at all. While inhaling, connect your
Thank you all, I appreciate it. don't know where any are.
Here. Imagination of feelings with the specific quality of the element, fire forming the idea of heat, water that of cold, air of lightness, and the earth of gravity. You have to begin with inhaling 7 times. Instead of dissolving the accumulated elements, giving it back to the universe. Through imagination, lead it to the part of the body you choose, by compressing the specific quality of the element, and fill the concerned part of the body with it. You should feel the compressed element with its specific quality much stronger in the single part of the body than in the whole body. Similar to steam producing a higher pressure when being compressed, the flesh, bones and the skin of the single part of the body have to be penetrated with the element. Consequently, if you are feeling the specific quality of the element enormously strong in the loaded part of the body, let it be dissolved with the help of your imagination throughout the whole body, and by breathing out, as described in step 3, let it stream forth and back into the universe. This exercise is to be done with each of the elements, alternately with every external and internal organ, with the exception of the brain and the heart, to avoid damage. Do not ever accumulate any element in these 2 organs at all, neither in your own case, nor in the case of other people. Only a master who is perfectly experienced in managing elements may allow himself a certain accumulation in the heart and brain without ruining himself. He knows his body and has got it well in hand. Every organ, the heart and brain as well, are suited for the supply of elements with their specific qualities, but of course without any accumulation. The beginner should always avoid the accumulation of elements or vital power in the heart or brain, especially if he is not yet able to observe the functions of the different organs with the help of clairvoyance. By performing an accumulation of elements or vital power in the whole body, the brain and the heart are getting used to the general accumulation. Because in this case attention is not related to one organ only, but is expanding over the whole body. It is very important indeed to manage the accumulation of elements and vital power in the hands and feet very well, because this will be of manifold use in the practical application of magic. The keenest attention should be paid to the fingers. A further possibility of withdrawing an element from an organ of the body is not to lead the accumulated element back into the body and deliver it through pore breathing to the universe, but with the help of imagination to return the whole element through the pores at once from the organ back to the universe. This process is quicker. A magician naturally must be capable of managing both methods and must understand how to handle them quite at will. The second method of element accumulation in any part of the body is to transfer one's own personality with the consciousness into one part of the body and to allow it, similarly to breathing through the pores, to inhale in and to breathe out the element that is inhaled with. Every breath stays there while you are breathing out thoroughly. As soon as you are feeling that a sufficient amount of the element has been accumulated in the inhaling part of the body, set it free again while you are breathing out. Give it to the universe from where you have drawn it. The process is quite simple and quick, but it requires a perfect transplantation of the consciousness. On the other hand, the accumulation of vital power in a certain part of the body has to be managed very skillfully indeed. When perfectly acquainted with this practice, you can proceed to a further step. We all know that the human body is divided in 4 principal regions, corresponding to the elements. For the sake of a better understanding, we shall repeat it. The feet up to the thighs. Rump bone including the genitals corresponds to the earth. The abdominal region with all the internal organs such as bowels, milt, gall, liver, stomach to the midriff corresponds to the water element. The chest, the lungs, and the heart to the neck corresponds to the air element, and the head with all its organs to the fire element. The task of the next exercise is to load the different regions of the body with the corresponding element. The practice is as follows. Take up your favorite position, asana. By breathing through the lungs and pores, inhale the earth element with its specific property of gravity into the earth region of the body, from the feet along the genitals to the rump bone. Inhale the earth element 7 times, and breathe out thoroughly, thus filling the earth region with the element influencing it. Keep the earth element in the earth region and inhale the water element 7 times into the water region. That is, the abdomen, without breathing it out, so that this region remains equally filled with its own element. Then turn to the next element and fill the chest with the air element 7 times, leaving this element in its own region without breathing it out. Now it is the turn of the head region, which you fill by inhaling the fire element 7 times. Exhale the empty breath and the head region will also remain filled with the fire element. All the regions being loaded with the corresponding elements, remain in this position about 2 to 5 minutes. And then begin with the dissolving of the elements. One begins where one finished, from the head with the fire element by empty inhaling 7 times, and breathing out the fire element 7 times into the universe. The head region being disengaged from the element. The next region we have to look at is that of the air, and after that the region of water, and finally that of the earth, until the whole body is free from the accumulation of the elements. If you achieved a certain skill in this practice, you may extend it by not only filling the different body regions with the elements, but by accumulating the elements in these regions. The process is the same as just described, that is, you begin again with the earth element and finish with the fire element. The procedure of dissolving is equal to the one of the previous experiment. These exercises are of great importance, because they establish the harmony between the material as well as the astral body in the universal rule of the elements. If the magician should ever get into disharmonies through any peculiar circumstance, all he has to do is practice these exercises and he will immediately redress the harmony. He will experience the comforting influence of the entire universal harmony not only for a few hours but for days, which is creating and keeping in him the feeling of peace and happiness. The harmony of the elements in the body offers more advantages, of which I shall mention only a few. First of all, the scholar is protected against the pernicious influence of the negative side of the elements. The very moment the scholar has achieved the magical equipoise, he is standing in the center of all events, and will be aware of all the laws, all the constitutive moments and processes taking place in the universe. In the true perspective, the scholar is spared from many illnesses, producing an effect of balance on his own karma and thus on his fate. He becomes more resistant against any dangerous influence. He is cleaning his mental and astral aura, strengthening his mental and astral matrix. He is reviving his magical faculties, and his intuition will become of universal character. His astral senses will be refined and his intellectual capacities will rise. Magical physical training. 4. The exercises of the first step should have become a habit by now. Those of the second step have to be enforced and deepened according to time and opportunity. One ought to have the capacity of sticking firmly to any asceticism one has imposed upon oneself without having to fight temptations or even to succumb to any of them. The exercises of the third step are to be deepened as well. One has to manage the position of the body so far as to endure the asana seat for hours without feeling the slightest disturbance, nervousness, tension or convulsion. The power of radiation has to be enforced, deepened, and must become more expansive, meaning more dynamic, which has to be accomplished by imagination and deep meditation. The magician has to learn the practical use of the radiant power for any purpose, and in any situation. He must reach such a degree of perfection that any desire that he is transplanting into the radiant power is realized instantly. In this manner he will be able to help suffering people in cases of illness and accidents, and thus bring great blessing to himself. Now we shall go on to a further chapter, also unknowns to date, concerning positions of the body, gestures and positions of the fingers, generally known as ritual. The fundamental principle of rituals is based on confirming an idea, a train of thoughts by an external mode of expression, or the other way around, producing a train of thoughts by a gesture or an action, which we shall designate evocation in Hermetics. This maxim is standing for the entire magical ritual. It is stated hereby that not only any idea can be expressed by an action, but can also be bound to a certain task. This refers to any creature as well. Anything not receiving and bearing a special name, symbol, or external mark is without significance. All the magical processes and rituals are based on this primordial thesis in every religious system with its special cult since the remotest times. The only difference is that nothing but a very small part has been accessible to the masses, whilst most of it has been kept strictly secret but reserved only to high priests and adepts. Every ritual answers a certain purpose, regardless whether the point in question be the banning witchcraft of Tibet or the gestures of fingers, mudras, performed by the Bali priests in their cults in the Orient, or the exorcism ritual of magicians. The synthesis will always remain the same. At a trial, the hand with 3 fingers raised for the oath as confirmation of a truthful statement may also be regarded as a magical gesture. From a Christian point of view, the raised fingers symbolize the Trinity. Each of the numerous lodges and sects has its own rites. The lodges of the Freemasons, for example, are all bound to a fixed sign, word and touch. A lot could be said about this problem from the historical point of view. For practical magic respecting the magical training, however, studies like these would be absolutely useless. It is of no importance at all to the genuine magician if he reads books about the particular way in which any other magician is drawing his magic circle, regarding it as a symbol of infinity, divinity, and purity, planting his genii and angels in it for the sake of protection, or else how Ilama is painting his Madonna and sets up his Thagatos as a symbol of protective deity. He does not need such strange directions because he knows very well that they are only a mental support for the mind. In this fourth step, the magician will learn how to produce his own rituals, gestures, and manipulations of the fingers. All this depends a great deal on his individuality and perception. Many a magician has achieved more with the most primitive rituals than a philosophic speculator with all his complicated performances of his cult. It is not possible to give an exact direction in this matter, and the scholar will have to act intuitively and must understand how to express the ideas, trains of thought, and everything he would like to be realized by a suitable gesture, position of the fingers, or by a ritual. He will certainly not try to express a blessing gesture by a clenched fist ready to attack. He will compose his individual unceremonious ritual according to his situation and position that he is using when no one is watching him. There are magicians who are performing rituals unnoticed in the middle of a big crowd by movements of their fingers in the pockets of their coats. In conformity with the elements, they are using the analogy of the 5 fingers by imputing the forefinger to fire, the thumb to water, the middle finger to akaza, the ring finger to earth, and the little finger to air. The right hand represents the positive element yes, and the left one the negative elements. This small example may be sufficient. Learn to give quite individual signs to different ideas, but keep silent about them, because if anyone else should use the same sign for the same idea, he would weaken it by the derivation of its strength. Bind and fix your personal desire that you wish most eagerly to be realized to your own small ritual or gesticulation, best of all to gesticulations of the fingers, and imagine that your desire is being realized by this gesture, or that it has been realized already. The rule of the present imperative formula is valid here as well. The imaginary realization in connection with the gesture or rite has to be performed at the beginning with the feeling of assurance, self-confidence, and self-reliance, and with unshakable faith in success. At first the ritual as well as the imagination have to be used. Later on, dealing only with the imagination of the desire and its realization, you will be induced without even noticing it automatically to use the gesture or the ritual. Having arrived at this point, that a desire has become an automatic function of your imagination, the process will go in an inverted order. You perform the ritual or the gesture, and the imagination or the power in question will automatically release their effect. This is the real purpose of the ritual, the position or the gestures of the limbs and the fingers. As soon as the ritual has become self-acting with the imagination, it will be sufficient to perform the ritual only to achieve the effect or influence you have been wishing for. A comparison very near to the point is offered by a fully charged battery that needs nothing but the correct contact to produce a current at any time. By repeating the imagination with the selected gesture or ritual, a power reserve is formed in the causal sphere of the akaza principle, which will adopt the necessary vibration, electromagnetic, fluid, color, sound, and all the analogies corresponding to the desire or purpose. We can rightly assert that they are blood particles of the entire condition. If this power reservoir has been loaded by frequent repetition, the mere ritual will produce the discharge of one part of this reservoir, bringing about the necessary effect in this way. It is therefore profitable not to talk about it, otherwise, somebody else could easily draw up the power by the same ritual and accomplish the effect, naturally at the sacrifice of the originator. Certain lodges let their beginners perform rituals by which such a power reservoir is loaded automatically. In this case, the higher adepts would get a cheap additional allowance and could work with it effortlessly. But as soon as the scholar is making progress and is capable of obtaining it by himself already, he will be advised to use this ritual as little as possible. Evidently, some people will come to the conclusion that several of the political movements or parties are performing an indirect magical action with the gesture of salute, and in this manner supply the general reservoir with more, however small, parts of the vital power, by constant repetition. We shall remember the salute of the German staff, consisting in a lifting of the hand and certainly representing a certain gesture of power. But if such an increased collective power reservoir is used for greedy and questionable purposes, this mentally strained power is turning against the founders because of its polarity, and decay and destruction will follow, apart from the fact that the curses of the absolutely innocent victims, binding in prisons, sentenced to death or sent to hopeless battles in the field, will invisibly produce an opposite polarity that will also contribute to the decomposition of the power reservoir. The same law works in all the rest of cult practices, no matter whether they happen in religions, sects or lodges. The miraculous healings in places of pilgrimage have the same fundamental base. The devoted believer is drawing up the spiritual power from the Akaza principle, accumulated there by the worshippers as a result of their firm faith and unshakable confidence, and the miraculous effect is carried out in this manner. The well-trained magician will always find the sole true explanation for such and similar phenomena by this knowledge of the universal laws. Using his knowledge of the polarity laws, he could without any doubt grasp all the power from the cult reservoir by force and produce healings or other ostensible miracles at any time if he wanted to. On a high ethical level, the magician would regard such deeds as a sort of theft, and therefore will always refuse to lower himself to do it because he has so many other possibilities at hand. This shall be mentioned only by the way, and we shall turn back again to the rituals. It has been said before that any idea, every desire and every imagination can be realized by a ritual, no matter which of the planes, material, astral or mental, be concerned. Only the time of realization depends on the mental maturity and the diligence of using the rituals. The magician will choose such best rituals of a universal character that he can use for a lifetime. The fewer desires he has, all the sooner he can book the success. Supposing the rituals he chose do not function effectively enough at first, he should not subjoin with others. In the beginning he ought to be satisfied with one or at most 3 rituals. Having arrived at this step of development, the magician will understand perfectly to check on the right path, and he will also know how much he is able to load. Step V. The wise Archimedes once said, "Show me one point on the universe and I shall move the earth." Very few people probably know that this sentence is concealing a great occult mystery, namely the secret of the 4th dimension. As we all remember from our school days, every thing having a shape, every body has length, width and height, definitions that are familiar to us. If in the middle of a form, for example a sphere, we imagine a double crossing, on the crossing spot we get a point, the so-called depth point. Archimedes certainly had this point in mind because it is actually the point of beginning, the starting point, the nucleus of every form. Regarded from this point, every point is symmetrically objective, meaning that it is in its true equilibrium. This is the base of the mystery of the 4th dimension, hence the concept of time and space, of timelessness and spacelessness, and therefore also the secret of space magic. The scholar is advised to meditate very intensely about this problem, and he will be able to open up profundities he never dreamed of, and a high intuition will be his reward. In association with the magical mental training of the step V, we shall speak about the space magic mental training, V. With all the previous exercises, the scholar has achieved a certain capacity of concentration, and he has learned to transform his consciousness at will or to adjust it to any form, and he will be able to see farther and deeper. The instructions of the 5th step shall show us how to transplant the consciousness into the center of any form, beginning with the tiniest atom to the highest universe. In this manner, the scholar not only learns to understand and interpret every form from its center, he will also be taught to master it from the center. The faculties acquired by means of the following exercises are of a very great at any time. This mental balance is the specific fundamental property of the Akaza or causal principle of the mind. Therefore let us turn immediately to the practical exercises. Take up your customary position. Now put some larger objects in front of you, perhaps a solid ball, a die, a cube, etc. It will be profitable at first to select objects with full contents. Fix your eyes for a short time on one of these objects, then close your eyes and transfer your consciousness to the depth point, that is, to the center. The transplantation of your consciousness has to be so close that you forget your body entirely. This exercise is very difficult indeed, but practice will make perfect. Nobody should be scared away by failures in the beginning, but keep on working diligently, and being accustomed to 3 dimensions. Only, some difficulties will occur at first, but they will diminish from one exercise to the next, and gradually one gets accustomed to concentrate on being in the depth point of any object. If you have been successful in staying for at least 5 minutes with your consciousness in the center of the object you choose, you may go on to the next object. After achieving the same good result, select different objects for exercising, but this time use unsymmetrical ones. Each time you must go so far that you transfer your consciousness in the center of any object and feel yourself as small as a poppy seed, even as an atom. If you can manage this, Without any disturbance, go ahead to the next exercise, seizing the dimension and shape of the object from your depth point. The smaller you feel yourself and the more your consciousness is shrinking, all the bigger the circumference or the width of the object will appear to you. From your point of view, the selected object represents a whole universe, and you must hold on to this feeling as long as possible. Once you have managed this exercise free from disturbances with a symmetrical object as well as with an unsymmetrical one, you can turn to another object. You may believe this exercise well performed if you can book the same good success with any object whatsoever. After numerous exercises of the depth point transference, you will attain the capacity to look through any object, and you will intuitively recognize the material as well as the mental structure of such an object. At the same time, you will obtain the faculty to influence every object from the nucleus, to load it magically at will, and thus to impregnate the mental sphere of every object with your desire. We have learned in the fourth step to master this problem through the accumulation of vital power from outward to inwards, and this step will teach us to do the same, but in a far more impressive manner, from inwards to outwards. A magician has to obtain the same effect with animals and human beings. He must also manage it with objects that are not directly before his eyes. Consciousness knows no bounds at all, therefore he can practice transference to the farthest distance. As soon as the scholar has reached this point, he can start on transferring consciousness into the fourth dimension in his own body, the microcosm, into the Akansa principle of his own being. The practice is as follows. You are sitting quietly in your familiar position with your eyes closed. Transfer your consciousness exactly into the middle of your body, into the pit of your stomach, the solar plexus. You must feel yourself as a mere dot, as an atom in the center between the spine and the pit of the stomach. This center is the center of gravity of your body. Try to stay there with your consciousness for at least 5 minutes. You may use an alarm clock to check the time. Regard your body from his point. The more diminutive you imagine yourself, the bigger you will perceive the circumference of your body, which will appear to you as a big universe. At this point, meditate as follows. I am the center of my body. I am the determining power therein. Difficulties in the beginning should not discourage the scholar, even if he manages it for only a few seconds at first. The seconds will become minutes by constant exercise. The limit for staying in this depth point is 5 minutes. Working through this step, the scholar should be able to transfer himself at any hour and in every situation into this depth point, into the Akansa principle, from there perceiving and influencing all that concerns his being. This consciousness transference into the Akansa principle is the genuine magical state of trance and represents the preliminary stage of the connection with the cosmic consciousness. I shall describe the practice relating to this linking up to the cosmic consciousness in a further chapter. The magical trance should not be mixed up with the state produced by spiritualistic mediums, provided we have to do with genuine psychical phenomena and mediums of integrity. Mostly a lot of mischief is done in this line to mislead credulous people. The real spiritualistic mediums bring about their trances whether with the help of a prayer, a hymn, or some other meditation, or through a sort of passivity, emptiness, of the mind, conjuring up a spontaneous displacement, shifting, of the consciousness. In this state it is possible for elementals, deceased people and certain low beings to induce the astral body together with the material body to manifestations and other undertakings. From the Hermetic point of view, such experiments are to be regarded as a sort of obsession, even if the beings in question should be good ones. The true magician naturally does not doubt the performance of such experiments, if they are to be taken very seriously, but he will feel very sorry indeed about these mediums. The magician himself can consciously form connections with beings in quite a different way, being fully aware of what he is doing. Particulars will be given in a special chapter. Magic Psychic Training, v. The practical instructions of the fourth step have taught us to draw the 4 elements from the universe into our body, to accumulate these elements first in the whole body and afterwards in every single part of it, thus producing a tension of elements which we call a dynamite. The body became more elastic with respect to the tension of elements from one exercise to the next, and more capable of resistance against the effect of pressure. This lesson will bring us farther step by step and teach us to project and manage the elements outwards, because without the outward projection of elements, any work in practical magic is inconceivable. We have to give our keenest attention to practical work. Sit down in your usual position. Inhale through the lungs and pores, and with the help of the imagination, press the element of fire into your body. You are inhaling the fire element with the specific property of heat, and you are inhaling empty breaths. If the warmth in your body seems to be very strong, consequently if there is a sufficient accumulation of this element, let the element receive through imagination from the solar plexus and fill the entire room floor. With the fire element. While you empty the element from your body, you should have the feeling that your body is completely delivered from it and the accumulated element has diffused into the whole room, similar to the procedure you followed in the impregnation of a room with vital power. Repeat the accumulation and evacuation several times, and by the emptying you will accumulate the fire element all the more in the room. As soon as you are free from the element yourself, you ought to feel how the element is amassing in the room, and get the sensation of the room becoming very warm. After some exercising the warmth in the room will become a real matter of fact, and any person, magically trained or not, who enters this room is bound to feel the warmth. A thermometer will indicate how far we are capable of condensing our imagination with respect to the fire, so that a materially perceptible warmth can be produced in the room. The success of this exercise depends entirely on the willpower and the plastic imaginative faculty. It is not absolutely necessary in this step to bring about such an amount of physical warmth that it can be measured by a thermometer. But supposing the magician takes a keen interest in working in this more spectacular way, he can specialize in this problem with the help of these instructions. The genuine magician, however, will not be satisfied with such an insignificant phenomenon, and rather prefers to further his own development because he is firmly convinced that he can obtain much more as time goes on. The exercise of the outward projection of the element is fulfilled as soon as the magician can distinctly feel the warmth in the room. Once he has got so far, he has to set free and pour out the accumulated fire element into infinity, into the universe again, where it dissolves spherically in all directions. Once it has been loaded with it, the magician can now leave the room any time he likes, without dissolving the element. He can also confine the element to the room for any period of time, just as he did before with the impregnation of the room. All the success depends on his imagination and willpower. On the other hand, it is not advisable to leave a room filled with a certain element for a very long time, because beings belonging to the element in question like to do their pranks in such an atmosphere, usually at the cost of the master. You will find more about this in the chapter concerning the work with element ghosts. Something different should be mentioned at this point. Supposing the magician does his exercise in the open air, in unlimited space, he will have to apportion a certain space, no matter how big, for himself with the help of the imagination. There are no bounds for the imagination, neither here nor there. In the same way as the scholar did his exercises with the fire element, he has to work with the other three elements. After fire, he should take up the air. After that the water, and finally the earth. The termination of the exercises depends on the scholar's time and opportunities. He can deal with one element one day, with the next one the next day, and so on. Or he can accumulate one element in the morning, the second at midday, the third in the evening, and the fourth element the next morning. Scholars who have plenty of time at their disposal and sufficient willpower can go through all four exercises by turns. These scholars will make enormous progress in mastering the elements. A scholar who controls all four elements in this direction may continue. The previous exercise has taught the magician how to accumulate the element in hail through the solar plexus outwards in space. In the following exercise he will learn how to emit an accumulated element into space not only through the solar plexus, but through the whole body, pour breathing, thus producing an accumulation of elements in space. This has to be practiced with all the elements. The dissolving and scattering into the universe has to be performed in exactly the same manner as described in the previous exercise. As soon as the scholar masters this exercise as well, he will proceed to performing this exercise not only with the whole body, but with parts of the body. Hands and fingers are usually engaged in magic, so the scholar ought to devote his full attention to them. He must accumulate the element by pour breathing in one hand or both in such a manner that through a sheer motion of his hand, as if in a flash, he emits the element into the selected space, impregnating it instantly. Repeated practice makes perfect here as well. The scholar should practice this exercise on all the elements and master it. Then he may continue. Sit in your customary position. Inhale the fire element through the lungs and pores of your whole body and accumulate it there until you get a sensation of heat. Now imagine the accumulated fire element forming a fiery ball with a diameter of 4-8 inches in the solar plexus. This compressed ball must be so fiery and shining as to be very similar to the sun. Now imagine this all moving out of the solar plexus and floating free in the air. The sun ought to be imagined as white hot and radiating heat. Stick to this imagery as long as you can. If you come near it with your hands, you ought to feel the heat radiating. Conclude this exercise by dissolving the ball slowly in the universe, or by blowing it up by a sudden explosion into nothingness. Both methods should become familiar to you. You have to deal in the same way with the elements of air, water, and finally with the earth element. For the sake of a clearer imagination while dealing with the air element, give it a sky blue color. While compressing it, the imagination of water will prove much easier for you, should you have difficulty with it. However, imagine it in the beginning as a spherical lump of ice. Think of the earth element as a lump of clay. When you have practiced this exercise with all the 4 element balls and have surely mastered it, turn to different shapes of the elements according to the same method. At first choose simple forms such as cubes, pyramids, cones, etc. The exercise is fulfilled as soon as you manage to condense any element you have accumulated in your body in any form and project it outward. Only if the previous exercise can be managed perfectly can the next one be taken up, which is dealing with the projection of elements directly from the universe. The practice is as follows. Sit in your asana position, breathing calmly and without any effort. Imagine that you are drawing the fire element from endless space, the universe, and with it fill the room you are in. Imagine the universe in the shape of an enormous ball from which you are drawing the fire element in all directions to your room. Remember that the fire element coming from the primary source is the most etheric and subtle, and the more you pull it to you, the more dense, material and hot it will become. You are bound to feel the heat on your body during this exercise. The more compressed and accumulated the element is condensed in the room, the stronger the heat will grow. You should actually have the sensation of being in a baking oven. Now dissolve the element into the infinite by your willpower and imagination. Repeat the same procedure for the air element, drawing it out of the ball-shaped universe, down to you from all directions, filling and condensing your room with it. Performing this exercise correctly, you ought to have the sensation of floating in an endless ocean of air, free from any gravity and attractive power. In a room filled in just the described manner, you should feel as light as a balloon. Afterwards you may dissolve the condensed air element again in its primary substance in exactly the same way you did with the fire element. Do likewise with the water element. Imagine you are drawing this element down to you out of an endless ocean, at first as a sort of cold vapor which you are condensing more and more the nearer you bring it to your body. Fill the whole exercise room with this cold vapor and imagine yourself in the center of this illusory water element. You must feel icy cold. The moment you are feeling this cold, dissolve the water element again to its original form and let heat stream away into nothingness. In this manner, the magician is able to cool and refresh his room in a few moments, even in the hottest summer days. Now try the same experiment with the earth element. Draw a gray mass, similar to clay, out of the universe. It is becoming browner and browner the nearer you bring it to yourself. Fill your room entirely with this heavy mass. By doing so you ought to experience the heaviness and cohesive power as well as its pressure on your body. Having gotten the earth element under your control, dissolve it again into its original material, as you did with the other elements. By now it is quite evident that the drawing down and materializing of the elements is happening exactly where we concentrated it without the element passing through the body. Everything is evidently occurring outside of our body. The magician is supposed to master both methods perfectly because in some magical tasks he will need an element which has been materialized through his body. For example, in cases of healing sick people. On the other hand, he will need the direct, universally condensed element for creating subservient ghosts and elementals. Mastering this practice too, he is qualified to go ahead. The next exercise will be to draw an element out of the universe, not however to fill a space, as described in the previous exercise, but to condense a self-selected form, similar to the exercises where forms of the elements had been condensed in the solar plexus and kept outside the body, floating in the air, the difference being that the formation of the shape does not take place inside the body, but immediately during its floating in the air. Consequently, the magician must know exactly how to produce a fireball, a ball of air, one of water, and an earth ball. If he has achieved this performance faultlessly, he has to shape different forms from the elements floating in the space and let these forms dissolve again in the universe. After some time, all the time he ought to feel the specific property of the element he is working with quite distinctly. He should be able to induce even a layman or ignorant people to see and feel the element in question. These are high achievements indeed, results of great effort in this line. In short, during the course of these exercises, the scholar should have Learn to condense every element of the universe and understand how to compress it into any form he chooses. Magicians trained in this line can condense an element to such a degree that it becomes a material power. That is why you can light a fire with the help of the fire element at the greatest distance. At first, practice drawing a fiery ball down from the universe directly, without having it pass through the body, and compress it to a small bead so as to grow a glowing spark. Put this spark in a cotton ball that has been soaked in easily inflammable liquid such as ether, alcohol, or petrol. A second spark is to be prepared in the same way with the air element, and the very moment both sparks touch the cotton ball, it will catch fire and begin to burn. Having succeeded in this little trick, the magician can make an attempt with the wick of an ordinary candle, and later on with a paraffin lamp. He can do this near and far. Apart from it, he can also confine a spark to a glass or a bottle, and fling a water spark into this container, quick as a flash. As soon as these two sparks touch each other, both elements will explode and the glass or bottle will break into pieces. The magician can compose such artifices himself because he knows and masters the rules. The genuine magician will not waste his time with such dallying. He knows very well that he could produce as well as stop phenomena such as lightning, thunder, and rain by means of the elements. All these forces that strike the layman as wondrous manifestations go without saying for the magician, and it is entirely up to him whether he likes to specialize in the line of phenomena or prefers to continue with his magical development. It is also a well-known fact to him that the Oriental fakirs accomplish their genuine mango tree miracle, growing from seed to fruit within an hour, only by mastering the elements. Besides, the learner has the possibility of controlling the material condensation of an element physically by throwing the condensed form of an element into a glass of clean, or even better, sterilized water and repeating this action several times. With fire the taste of the water will appear sort of acidulous, with air sweetish, with water astringent, and with earth musty. This can be tested chemically by dipping a piece of litmus paper into the prepared water. If the water has been impregnated thoroughly, one will detect an acid reaction with the litmus paper when the active elements of fire and air are concerned, while the reaction will be alkaline in the case of water and earth. Who would not be reminded of the wedding at Cana where our Lord transformed water into wine? Only such a high adept as Jesus Christ could accomplish this miracle, not by influence of the elements from the outside, but by mastering the causa principle of the water being transformed from the inside. At this point I shall finish the mastering of the elements as far as the magical training of the soul in step 4 is concerned. Nobody is expected to advance before he has worked thoroughly through all the tasks and exercises. The exercises are all going hand in hand, interdepending on each other. I take it for granted that it will not enter anyone's mind to stick to single exercises and methods only. The result would be fatal to the health of the person and the success would never come. These facts have to be considered very carefully. But he who does perform one exercise after the other scrupulously can proceed with a clear conscience and can work on the magical development at full speed. Magical physical training, v. In this step I shall quote some exercises that render possible a deliberate passive communication with the invisible ones from a magical point of view. In a certain way the methods resemble the spiritualistic ones, but the magician will soon notice that he is not training himself to become a person without any will of his own, called a medium by the spiritualists. The magician may not become a plaything of uncontrollable powers. On the contrary, he directs his powers consciously and also learns to use them deliberately. In this respect, he considers the laws of the invisible world as well as those of the physical world. To further the passive communication with invisible beings, there are recommended mainly the levitation exercises with the purpose to magically prepare any part of the body in such a manner that such beings can manifest themselves with the help of levitation. Let us begin the practice at once. Sit comfortably in front of a table and put your hands on it. Perform an accumulation of vital power in your right hand and concentrate on the fact that you are able to manage your hand and your fingers solely with your willpower, that is, not with the help of the muscles. Afterwards, let the accumulated vital power diffuse into the universe by way of the imagination. Now, begin with the proper levitation exercise. Accumulate the air element in the forefinger of the right hand, and concentrate on the forefinger becoming as light as air. Next try to imagine that you are lifting the forefinger with the help of your willpower, leaving the hand with the other fingers quiet and motionless on the table. You must have the feeling that it is not your muscles lifting the finger, but that your willpower is doing so. As soon as you have managed To get the finger up, let it drop by your willpower. Should you stop to concentrate while the finger is still aloft, it would drop instantly. One could try this only to establish how far the willpower or the muscles are intervening in it. If you are able to levitate the forefinger of the right hand with your willpower, you can proceed in the same manner with the other fingers. The levitation exercise is fulfilled as soon as you can lift and drop all the fingers of the right hand at your own will. Now proceed in the same way with your left hand and its fingers. Having managed this as well, try to lift the whole hand this way. First the right hand and afterwards the left one. Provided you can notice a success after several exercises, go ahead by lifting the hand that will not only up to the wrist, but right up to the elbow. You can extend these exercises and lift both hands at once with the help of your willpower. Should the magician decide to extend these exercises over the whole body, he would succeed after a while, without any doubt, in raising his whole body by his willpower. He would be able to walk upon the water without sinking down. He could even ascend into the air with his whole body and accomplish numerous other similar actions just as it pleases him. It is, of course, obvious that he would have to practice these exercises for many years in order to gain the aforesaid success. Grand adepts do manage to produce such phenomena without any difficulty, without being forced to do such exercises for years, because it all depends on the magical maturity and development. Never will any magician of a higher rank perform phenomena of that kind without an urgent reason, and least of all to satisfy the curiosity of other people. At our stage of development, we shall be content to move the hands and fingers according to our own will. Having reached this point, we shall turn to a different preparatory exercise which is absolutely necessary for the passive communication with the invisible ones. I shall demonstrate the practice as follows. Sit down at a table and rest your hands calmly on it. Now try plastically to imagine that your spiritual hand is protruding from the physical one. Put the psychic hand close by the physical one or let it glide through the table to your knees. You have to regard the imaginary spiritual hand as your real one. In the carnal hand there is now occurring a mental vacuum that has the shape of the external hand. At this moment, think that the carnal hand is quite harmless, being thus in the fourth dimension, the causa principle. If you did manage this for a short while, go back again with your mental hand into the carnal one and finish the exercise. Repeat this several times until you succeed in exteriorizing the hand as described for at least 5 minutes. You can work on the other hand in the same manner. As soon as you have managed this very well, you are prepared to take up the communication with the invisible ones. We can see by now that the magic preparation is very different from that of the spiritualists, who behave passively insofar as they take a pencil into their hands and write or paint. Whether the messages that are asked for by the medial writing or painting of the spiritualists are actually coming out of the fourth dimension, or the way they say it, from the world beyond, or whether they originate only in the subconsciousness of the medium in question is entirely left to the judgment of the magician. A hand that has been exteriorized according to our method has really been transplanted into the fourth dimension and can be seen by any being of that sphere that wants to use it to send messages to our material world. As soon as the beginner has done these exercises, he is able to communicate with the beings of the fourth dimension. The magician will first of all try to come in contact with his guardian genius, his spiritual guide to whom he has the closest relationship. Every scholar of magic is fully aware of the fact that the divine providence at the hour of his birth has given him a being with the purpose to watch over its protege, to guide and to inspire him. In accordance with the development and the karma, this being can be a deceased person or else an intellectual entity not yet embodied on this planet. This being takes care of the spiritual comfort of the protege mostly up to the puberty period. The more man is maturing intellectually, the less attention does the spiritual leader pay to him. Especially in cases of people who do not even remember their guide. The contact is loosened more and more. A lot could be said about the ranks of such guardians and their activity as well, but that would overstep the frame of this work. The magician certainly has got the faculty to communicate with his guide to learn all he wants to know and to receive everything he is in need of, provided he is honestly interested in the whole problem of ennobling his character and working hard on his magical development. He may be quite sure that his guide will try first to make himself known to him. Therefore the scholar should aspire to come into contact with this guardian genius. Here follows the necessary practice. Take a sidereal pendulum. It does not have to be a special pendulum, a ring or a small object. Will do likewise, even a nail tied to a silk thread if nothing else is conveniently near. Twist the end of the thread several times around your forefinger. The pendulum is swinging about 8-12 inches free in the air. Sit down at a table and put both your hands on it. The elbow of the hand holding the pendulum is to be propped on the table. The hand is to be kept upright with the pendulum swinging free about 2-3 inches above the tabletop. Put a glass of water, a vase, or any tinkling object about 2-3 inches from the pendulum. As soon as you have finished all the preparations according to these instructions, exteriorize your mental hand from the one holding the pendulum and put the mental hand close by the carnal one. Having done so, develop a state of trance in yourself for a few moments, the way you have been instructed in the chapter about mental training by recognizing yourself with your consciousness in the solar plexus. Therefore you are now in the fourth dimension. In this condition, call your guide and ask him in your mind that he might manifest to you with the help of your magically prepared hand. Keep silent and observe the pendulum, beseeching the guide at the same time to indicate with one stroke of the pendulum on the glass a no, with 2 strokes perhaps, and with 3 strokes a yes. You will be very astonished indeed to notice that the pendulum is beginning to move, giving the requested strokes. Sensitive people will even notice that the hand holding the pendulum has been moved by a strange hand. You will probably have the feeling that your own hand has become a glove with a strange hand in that is moving the pendulum. Other persons again will not notice anything at all, but instead have the sensation that the desire is guiding the mind indirectly, moving the muscles of the hand and hence causing the pendulum to sway to and fro. The outcome is absolutely individual and depends on the aptitudes. Supposing the first attempt to produce the communication with the spiritual leader should fail, there is no need to be discouraged. After a few more attempts, every scholar will certainly succeed in bringing about the communication. Once the connection has been established, one can ask questions to the leader whether mentally or aloud, which will be answered with a yes or no, or perhaps the questions mainly ought to concern the leader himself. For example, if he is willing to manifest himself, or if he is already embodied on this planet and such like. As soon as the contact has been brought about with the help of the pendulum, one can use a planchette instead of waiting for the strokes on the glass. This gadget is a circular disc, divided in sections, each marked with a letter of the alphabet. A small circular blank is left in the center of it. The pendulum will point out single letters, and by spelling the letters, one will receive messages in detail from the leader. After achieving a good result, one can arrange for a bigger planchette containing the entire alphabet, numbers, sections with yes, no and perhaps days and hours. In the center is a blank space to start from. For performances with this planchette, the pendulum is replaced with a small lacquer glass. Trace an arrow with ink or paint to serve as a pointer on the base of the glass. Now take the lower part of the glass between your forefinger and middle finger and allow the glass to be moved on the letters by the leader's hand. The arrow will then indicate the respective letter. To operate an easier gliding motion of the glass, one can set the planchette under glass, because the lacquer glass will move about much more easily on the smooth glass base. The scholar may find out for himself such and similar appliances. He will also find many constructive observations in the spiritualistic literature. All that matters is satisfaction of the most urgent needs of the moment. A further method is to beseech the leader to lift the forefinger of the magically prepared hand. Ask him to lift the finger once if the answer is no, twice if perhaps, and 3 times if the answer is yes. Noticing a success with the forefinger, try it with the other fingers too. One will notice that there is always a certain finger that is particularly easy to get on with. One ought to stick with the finger that is moving best. This of course depends on the flexibility. The magician will appreciate this method very much because it will enable him to operate a passive connection with the invisible world, either with his leader or with a deceased person. Even in a situation where a planchette or a pencil cannot be used, such as at a party, outdoors, and so on. If he has acquired a certain skill in this matter, he can even hold his hand in his pocket and get replies of yes or no in a vast crowd. Having managed all these experiments, one can take up the medium mystic writing. The method is as follows. Put a sheet of paper in front of you and take a pencil between thumb and forefinger like you do for writing. Now push a rubber ring not too tight over your thumb, forefinger and middle finger. You can make this ring by cutting it off a bicycle tire. The purpose of the ring is not to have to concentrate entirely on holding the pencil. Now induce a trance in yourself. Call your spiritual leader. Prepare your right hand magically for him to write with. In the beginning you will notice only some uneven lines, later on illegible words, and after some exercising, words and sentences will come about. When one sheet of paper has been filled with writing, change it for a new one. You can get a reply to every question. By constant exercising you will acquire such a skill that the medial writing does not cause any difficulty at all. In this manner, you will be able to call deceased friends, relatives and members of your family with whom you want to get in touch. The magician will be convinced that there is no such thing as hence and beyond, that there are only different degrees of density in the fourth dimension, where diverse beings exist, and death will not mean the end of everything to him, but a passing over to the fourth dimension. Finally, I should like to remark that there are several kinds of medial writing according to the aptitudes, which I shall mention briefly. 1. The automatic, mechanical method. In this case, the hand moves absolutely automatically, without the magician knowing what he wants to write or what the spirit concerned is going to write. Messages in foreign languages will also be received, even in languages the magician does not know and has never heard before. Paintings and drawings can be created as well. 2. The inspirational method, the most frequent. Here the messages will be given as sort of thinking aloud inside or outside the own personality. In this case, one practically knows beforehand what the being is about to write. By frequent repetition this inspiration will become loud thinking and listening in the passive communication. One will perceive messages from the depth of the soul or from outside of the self. 3. The intuitive method, where you have the feeling as if you did the writing yourself. Any questions will be answered instantly. Nobody but oneself appears to know the answer to the question. This is a kind of clear knowledge. The hand writes words and sentences in full consciousness, without the person hearing anything or being inspired in any way. The methods also can appear in a mixed kind, for example half automatic and half inspirational, or intuitive and inspirational, or all together. Which of the methods will be the dominant one will only be known after a long period of exercising. Each of the methods is good and reliable, provided you are using it honestly and candidly. Practice makes perfect. Now I should like to give a comment with regard to the questions one is going to ask the beings and to the answers one can expect. First of all, the magician is not supposed to boast of his exercises and results. The or silent he is keeping about his communication with the invisible ones, the better for him. Furthermore, when choosing the questions to be asked, you always have to consider that the beings you are contacting are subject to laws different from those we have to deal with on this physical plane. Besides, beings that have been living before on this earth will soon lose their orientation because our physical plane is tridimensional, depending on time and space, which does not occur in the sphere of the fourth dimension. Only highly developed beings are capable of giving correct information about time, events, future, etc. Consequently, the magician will first inquire about the home of those beings and rather prefer messages about the fourth dimension for the sake of his own education. Later on, as soon as the scholar has developed his spiritual senses, he will no longer need the passive communication with the invisible ones because he is himself able to achieve anything about which such a being could inform him. The passive communication only serves the purpose to be convinced of the existence of another world which everybody will enter and live in after passing away. Step 5. Before I describe the exercises of Step 5, I shall underline once more that all the previous exercise have to be under perfect control in order to keep the balance in the higher degree of development too. It would be absolutely useless to skip one of the steps or to omit and neglect one of the exercises. Any gap would become very perceptible and the scholar would have great difficulty to make up for one or the other problem in his other exercises to ascertain for oneself the whole mental body and the astral body together. In the material body, like a hand in a fine silky glove that is put into a thick glove. Your hand ought to feel both gloves. The same thing is supposed to occur in the whole mental body. You should feel your spirit in the fine astral body and this one again in the material body. This feeling is the spirit. Meditate on this problem at any suitable opportunity. As soon as you are quite sure that your spirit is captivating the astral body as well as the material one, feeling and moving it, and that it is your spirit that performs all the actions through the two raps, you can go one step farther. Whether consciously, half-consciously or nearly subconsciously, everybody is executing some actions suggested by an inner or an outer impulse without paying any attention to it. The next exercise will teach you to accomplish actions fully consciously, little acts and disturbances of balance for you. For this particular reason it is advisable to begin first with small actions over a short spell of time and to extend them as long as you Like, this experiment is very important because it will give the scholar the possibility to accomplish any action with a mental as well as astral connection with the material body. According to his working with the mental or the astral sphere, such an action is called the magical action. The scholar will certainly understand now why magic rituals never show any success with persons who have not been initiated or who have not been trained in magic. Because people like these do not own the capacity of executing the ritual magically, that is, they are not prepared to work in connection with the material stuff in a mental and astral way. Let us take the example of a magnetizer putting his hands on a patient's body or performing magnetic strokes, but without allowing his mental and astral hands to emanate at the same time, nor imagining that the mental force is pervading and influencing the spirit, the astral power doing the same to the astral body of the patient, and the material power influencing the material body. This magnetizer will never achieve anything else but a partial success because the patient does indeed consist of all the three components, namely the body, the soul and the spirit. That goes without saying for the magician, that the mental body is only influencing the mental sphere or the spirit in the same way as the astral body affects the astral sphere only. That is, the soul, and the material body concerns the material body only. This law has to be respected. Hence it is necessary for the magician to adopt a mental as well as a psychic disposition in order to perform actions whether as a spirit or in connection with the soul. Once he has understood this problem very well and mastered the practice perfectly, he can advance in his development. The next task will deal with the magical training of the senses. First of all, a very important preliminary exercise, similarly to the previous exercise, you are realizing in this one as well, that not your material eyes see everything but that it is the spirit that perceives all with the help of the astral and the physical eyes. Meditate on this problem as often as possible. You will have to imagine for at least 5 minutes that the spirit is looking through the physical eyes and actually does see. The longer you are able to endure this, all the better for you. You will become a master here as well by constant repetition of this experiment. Having achieved a success in this exercise with the eyes, turn to the ears by realizing that it is not your physical ear that is receiving the sound waves, but that the mental ears are perceiving everything with the help of the astral and the material eyes. If you can book the same result as you did in the case of the eyes, continue in the same manner with the senses and imagine that the spirit, with the help of the astral and the material body, is feeling objects, cold, warmth, etc. Practice this experiment diligently until you can master it with the eyes, ears, and the feeling. Should you wish to develop special faculties, try it also with the olfactory sense and the taste. But the keenest attention should be paid to the three sense organs of seeing, hearing and feeling, which are the most useful for practical magic. If you achieve good results in the mental ascertainment of the senses, try to adjust your spirit to two of the senses at the same time. Begin with the eyes and the ears. If you manage to bring it about for at least 5 minutes without any interruption, adjust your spirit to 3 senses at once, that is seeing, hearing and feeling. If you can manage this as well, you have indeed made progress in your magical development. This preliminary exercise is very important for the so-called clairvoyance, clairaudience and clairsentience, and ought to be mastered perfectly. The scholar will find the principal exercise in step 7 of this course. Magic Psychic Training, Vi. In step V we learned how to project the elements outwards. Now we shall go farther and learn how to master the Akasa principle with respect to the elements. It has been mentioned in the theoretical part that the elements originate in the Akasa principle, by which they are dominated and kept in the correct balance. After a long time of exercising, a magician who has achieved good results with the elements will also be able to control the finest principle. That is the astral ether. The exercise is as follows. Take up your usual position, asana, and close your eyes. Imagine that you are in the center of an unlimited space. There is no above or below or sideways. This unlimited space is filled with the finest energetic matter, the universal ether. Ether is colorless, but to our senses it appears to be of ultraviolet, near black-violet color, and this is the color in which we imagine the etheric matter. You are inhaling this etheric matter and conveying it deliberately through pulmonary breathing to the blood. If you have achieved a certain skill in doing so, execute the same operation by breathing through the lungs and pores as you did in the accumulation of vital power, but with the difference that you inhale the colored ether and fill your whole body with it instead of with the vital power. In performing this exercise you have to retain the feeling of being united to the entire infinite space. You have to be, as it were, completely secluded from the world. It is necessary to become acquainted with this unusual state of mind. In any case, you ought to avoid losing consciousness and falling asleep. Supposing that you do feel tired, break off the exercise immediately and choose another time. When you are more fit, after some successful exercises in the whole body or breathing with Akaza, you can go ahead. We have heard that Akaza is the primary source, the sphere of all causes. Any deliberate cause, such as a wish, a thought, any imagination created in the sphere together with the dynamic conviction is bound to be realized with the help of the elements, regardless of the level or sphere on which the realization necessarily has to be performed. This is one of the greatest magic mysteries and a universal key for the magician, who will understand its range only later on in the course of his development. The scholar should always keep his mind on his own ethical development, which will certainly help him to do only good and noble deeds. Our next exercise will be to win absolute control of the elements with the help of the Akaza principle in all the three realms. The exercise is as follows. You are sitting in your usual position, inhaling a stream of Akaza through the lungs and pores, and filling the whole body with it. At this point I would like to mention that Akaza cannot be accumulated in the same way as vital power. At the very inhaling you must imagine that you are starting the control of the four elements. Consider that you have already got the faculty of mastering the elements and that they will fulfill everything you are ordering or wishing for. No matter on which plane the realization of your desires has to happen. With every breath you ought to feel your mastery of the elements. The faith and the confidence in your control of the elements has to be unshakable and imperturbable. You must not allow yourself the faintest doubt. Anyone who is working scrupulously through all these exercises will gain the absolute control of the elements after more or less exercising. A magician who has established the magical balance in himself with respect to the elements, having ennobled his character and having acquired the highest virtues and ideals, will very soon attain this power. He will feel his faith becoming as firm as a rock and will be absolutely sure of his conviction, which excludes any doubt at all. On the other hand, any person who has not been working scrupulously enough, or scholars who skipped any steps and neglected exercises will feel doubtful about one problem or another, and the influence of one element that is keeping him in check most of the time will not tolerate to be mastered. Here and now the scholar will realize why such a high value is set on scrupulousness and endurance in the execution of the exercises. There is no gap allowed to spring up in the process of development, otherwise the scholar will fall behind and some of the problems could only be set right under the greatest difficulties. A scholar who is perfectly sure of his mastering the elements will soon notice that he is capable of projecting the elements.
I got the baby, and the baby got through. I got her like a little shoe. Jeez. Sister. Yeah. Cheese. Go ask her open your cheese too. Go ask her open your cheese. Cheese. Go ask her to open your cheese. Fuck.
Power off.
Your daddy what? Your daddy what? Your daddy what? 3, alchemy. 3, alchemy. 3, alchemy.
Power on. Bluetooth pairing.
Baby, you know where she's at for? Look, boo, I want to show in it. Say, please, my sister, please. Please, my sister, please.
Things very easily, outwards as well as inwards so. That all seems to be a child's play to him. Having arrived at this point, the magician can turn to transferring the power of the elements into a suitable ritual. I have talked about this.
Bluetooth connected.
The magician forms any ritual after his own liking by means of finger positions and gestures of the hands into which he is transferring the power. According to his magical development, he will certainly dispose of a sufficient amount of intuition so that he can compose the ritual suitable to the element in question. He can provide it with a self-selected word, formula, and link it to a certain sound, corresponding to the element, Quabala. It is quite impossible to make a mistake here, because the rituals are absolutely individual, purely personal. Therefore the rituals that the magician composes for this purpose are not to be imparted to anyone else. Another person could attain the same success in mastering the elements by using these rituals, which of course would happen at the expense of the power of the magician who actually composed the rituals. Supposing that a person who does not have the magical maturity makes use of such rituals, he would certainly suffer great damage, and bring ill fate to other people for whom the rituals had been used. Therefore be very careful and select only a kind of ritual that you can use in a large crowd as without anyone observing it. For example, a ritual with a finger position in your pocket. The genuine magician will regard this warning as fully justified. First of all, the magician must try to compose the ritual for an element of the astral sphere, with which he is putting the virtue of one element in operation, and at the same time another ritual with the help of which he can dissolve this power again instantly if he chooses. In the same way he ought to operate with the other three elements, thus creating by his power 8 rights for the astral sphere and 8 for the material production as well. As soon as the rights become automatic by a long period of exercising and repeating, it will be sufficient to use the ritual only, which will make the elements start working immediately according to the purpose to be accomplished. If the magician wishes the effect to be cancelled, it will be enough to use the necessary revoking rite. This method should become a habit that renders performance easy and possible without any effort or imagination at all. I mentioned before that the magician is able to achieve everything through the action of the elements in the astral as well as in the material world. To attain this state of maturity, a great amount of patience, endurance and tenacity will be required. Even then, when the scholar is developing more and more on higher levels, he ought to work at mastering the elements until he really becomes a true master, provided he is possessed by high ideals and wants to do good deeds only to help mankind. Divine providence will bless him, endowing him with unexpected faculties to